Welcome everyone to our ProTech Talk. This particular ProTech Talk is one of a series that ProTechnics and Core Lab have been conducting here starting back in February of this year. And this particular one, we've entitled A View from the C-Suite with a subtitle of What is the Big Picture View of the Path to Recovery? And we have selected a group of 3 panelists that we think are in an excellent position to address some of the topics associated with that challenge. And we're very excited that you've joined us. And before we begin with our topics, I'd like to introduce ProTechnics President, Don Dumas, who's going to offer some welcoming remarks. Don?
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. And good morning to everyone. And on behalf of Core Lab, welcome to what I believe is our 7th ProTech Talk we've done this year. As Buddy said, this one's entitled A View from the C-Suite. And accordingly, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists that we have today, our 3 executive panelists. Firstly, Vicki Hollub, President and Chief Executive Officer of Occidental Petroleum. Thank you so much for being here, and we appreciate your time. Tim Duncan, President and Chief Executive Officer of Talos Energy. And once again, Tim, welcome, and thank you for your time. And finally, Larry Bruno, our own President and Chief Executive Officer at Core Lab. So once again, welcome, and thank you to all 3 of you for making time in your schedule to be on the panel and join us today. Just in case some of you might be joining us for the first time for a ProTech Talk, just to give you an idea, these are our forums, industry forums that have been created by Core Lab to elevate the level of communication and collaboration, particularly between oil and gas operators and the service sector. Over the last few months, we've covered topics more technical in nature, some more operational, but all of them have been of vital importance to the oil and gas industry. So very much like today's talk, we're going to have an executive view of this downturn that we're fighting our way through in the industry, and what it looks like from the 30,000-foot view, if you will, of how we get through this recovery and what is our path in the oil and gas industry to recovery and to the future. So I know it's going to be a lively and enjoyable discussion. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, buddy, and thanks again.
Thank you, Don. Well, before we start digging into the topics here, let's see if we can kind of get to know our panelists a little bit here. So one of the things I'm going to do is we're going to have a little challenge. Don, I don't think you mentioned their alma maters, did you?
I did not. Sorry, I had myself muted already.
I apologize for having to ask that. Since you didn't mention their alma maters, we're going to have a little challenge and see if you can figure out who their alma maters are. And it's going to be kind of a roundabout way, just a little fun contest for the audience. So I'll mention that here in a moment, but first, we'd like to ask the panelists to tell us something about themselves, an interesting fact that most people might not know about them. So who'd like to lead off here?
Vic, you want to lead off?
Okay, well, I'll just say that people know way too much about me. I never imagined that I would be in the news as much as I've been in the news, and I don't want to be in the news anymore. So I think everybody knows everything. In fact, I live on water down in the Galveston area, and there was a boat docked anchored close to my dock, and made me suspicious as to why they were staying there so long. And I thought, it's got to be news people just trying to pick up something else. But I think that if there's, I think everybody knows the Alabama story about me. Everybody, I just blew your thing. Everybody knows kind of, I think that what we've been through here recently. I would just say that the one thing that people may not know much about is that I was a musician wannabe, and thankfully I was unsuccessful at that.
All right, Tim, talk to us.
Yeah, look, Poor Vicki. I empathize on a smaller scale running, and we all know on this call, running a public company is whether you like it or not, your stuff's been researched when you go home and meet new relatives or whatever. But, a couple of things. One, and I don't want to say this in a negative way. So I'm actually half deaf. I'm deaf out of my right ear, and it's something that happened when I was a child. So it was a little difficult. But what's interesting about that, and I think I think I'm a better listener than people think because I don't have a choice. And I will tell you, this is what's made virtual stuff hard for me. I look at you when you talk and that's made me actually a better listener. I think maybe a better manager and a better negotiator because I got to pick up on facial cues. The other thing, it's just a fun fact. I think people, when they get to know me, maybe they don't think, but I'm not a big on, I need an autograph from a sports hero or anything like that, but I collect kind of old autographed books. I like to read. I grew up a reader. And so I've got like an original signed Atlas Shrugged. I've got a signed To Kill a Mockingbird. I've got, these books and yeah, they're some of my prized possessions and they're in my office. And it just, to me, that's holding on to history. And I just kind of think it's neat. So it's, somebody might think, well, the guy's from Texas and runs an oil company. He probably collects rare guns. And I don't. I collect rare books. But I think it's fun and, maybe a little nerdy. But that's a couple things people may not expect.
Cool. Thank you. Last but not least.
Yeah, buddy. Thanks. Morning, everybody. Vicki and Tim, thanks very much for giving us some of your time today. I really appreciate it from behalf of all of Core Lab. I guess a lot of people have fathers that fought in World War II, as did I, except the difference is my dad lost World War II. He was born in Sicily, and so he and my mom came to the U.S. Not long after the war ended, and so I'm first generation, and I think being I would say I wouldn't quite call them war refugees, but being the child of folks that grew up and had those experiences kind of colored my view on the opportunities that America brought. And I try to encourage my kids and everybody I know to understand what great opportunities we have here.
Thank you very much, Larry. Okay, as far as the alma maters, Vicki's already blown one of my challenges here, but I'll describe their favorite sports teams, see if you can figure out what the schools or their favorite sports team is. In one case, it might not refer to the school. In one case, one of the individuals, their favorite sports team's head football coach is known to make commercials with a talking duck. So see if you can figure that one out. In another case, one of their favorite sports teams, the head football coach is an avowed pirate. So try that one. And then finally, one of the panelists' favorite sports team is not a football team. It's in a different sport, but this individual is reported to have a flag that reads, "Don't tread on the pinstripes." So there you are. See if you can figure out what those three favorite sports teams are. And at the end of the webinar, we'll announce the answers. There's no prize. I'm sorry, it's a low budget operation here, but just for fun. Okay. Now that we know a little bit about our panelists, and again, we're so pleased to have the three of you here. This is an exciting time for us. Let's delve a little deeper into your background. Would you tell us some of the most inspirational leaders that you've experienced in your career, and what did you learn from them? Who wants to go first?
I can take it. It's interesting. I came out of school in 95 and, the oil prices, if you guys recall then, 95, 96, 97, they were low. I was a whippersnapper young engineer, and I'm trying to figure out, I worked for a company called Zilka Energy. And so it was a private company that was doing some, phenomenal things in the Gulf. And I was learning how people were building companies. And so, I had a lot of good bosses, and it would take me forever to name some of my bosses. Some of my bosses worked for me down the hallway in management positions now when I was working for them in my 20s. But a couple observations in terms of how do you think about building a company, particularly offshore, as I always admired and got to know him a little bit. Didn't work for him, Joe Foster, and how he built, Newfield, and how he thought about balancing, you know, M&A, which is what we do, and asset management, and then balancing exploration. And how do you bring those together to build the right balance of capital allocation? I just thought how he built that in employee ownership and in employee accountability and peer, you know, he had a concept around peer reviews. I mean, there's a lot of things they did in those early days, a bunch of ex-Tenneco guys that I thought was interesting. Externally, you know, he hasn't always been you know, I think a political figure that's got some controversy, but, you know, I've always admired George W. Bush's compassion, you know, as I've thought about my own views. You know, one thing about, you know, George W. Bush and his father a little bit, but I do think George, he was a man of principle. You knew where he stood, and he stood towards compassion. And I just always thought that was a good thing behind whether every decision was the right decision or a perfect decision. I think he was a principled person, and you at least try to be that when you walk through all this.
Fantastic. Now, you know, speaking of George Bush, I'll never forget at his memorial that jet flyover. That was amazing.
Oh, senior, yeah.
Senior, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Vicki?
Okay, I'd say that the two that I got some key points from were Bear Bryant, first of all, and the Sultan of Oman, which may explain why I'm in the news so much now. But Bear Bryant, to me, did all the right things by people. His character, with respect to how he treated people, was critically important, and the way he motivated his team. The two things, I could go on and on and on, as people in Oxy will tell you, this is never good to ask me this kind of question. I could talk for days, but I'll boil it down to two of the things that I saw that he did, read about, was the fact that when he selected players for the University of Alabama, he selected those that had a passion, those that had a desire to play for Alabama and to make Alabama successful. So the passion to win was one of the most important things. And with that came character. He wanted the character with it. But then the second big thing is that when he got them onto campus, what he would do is whether they were a 3-star or a 5-star, it didn't matter what their rating was coming in and onto campus. What he felt like was the most important thing to do is make them to believe that they were a 5-star. And he felt if you can make them believe they're a 5-star, then they'll start practicing like a 5-star, then they'll start playing like a 5-star. And to me, my takeaway from that is to help people understand and believe in themselves. If people really believe in themselves and their own ability, they're likely to step up and to go above and beyond. And so I look for passionate employees, and I look for employees who just need that boost of trust and confidence, and then they're going to excel. And we have great employees that are doing that today. And then from the Sultan of Oman, he took over in a bloodless coup from his father back in 1970. He had to overthrow his father to get Oman out of this quagmire of being so backward with hardly any paved roads in 1970. So he took the bold step to take over and then built Oman into what it is today. And what it is today is it's a modern city, but when you land there, you see that it doesn't look modern. It doesn't look like New York City. It doesn't look like Dubai. It looks like you would expect Oman to look, but it has the character and all the modern facilities and qualities. And I asked him, I had the opportunity to have a couple of dinners with him. And in the second dinner, when I was bold enough to ask things beyond the business, I asked him how he made his decisions, what led him to do what he did, to do something as that bold. And he pointed to the sky and he said, it's not driven by here, it's driven by here, and pointed to his heart. And so he's a leader that led his people through his heart. And I think if we could think about that and what that really means, I think that's important, especially where our society is today.
Very good. Thank you, Vicki. How about it, Larry? Who motivated you?
Yeah, I can think of two that really stand out. And as I think about it, there's a sort of commonality of how they dealt with difficult times. First is the first boss I had coming out of grad school, 1985. And I would say until recently, that was about as tough a time in the industry as there'd been. layoffs all over, oil price collapsing, gloom and doom around the industry. And so the first boss I had, name was George Bolger. I'm still friends with him today. He showed a calm hand, and he took a young geologist and made sure that I didn't sort of lose a passion for the science that got me into the topic, because there was such a sort of a dark sky out there. And so that sort of even-handedness is something that I still try to bring to work with me every day. And another one, and it's one unfortunately person just generationally never got to meet, but that Lou Gehrig speech always rings in my head. Here's the point in the guy's life, he knows he's going to die. And a person whose whole persona was built around being sort of an indestructible physical being, and to get up in front of that crowd there and talk about being the luckiest man on the face of the earth, very inspirational. It's never as bad as it seems, and always look for the optimism out there.
That's excellent. That's excellent. You've also probably given away another one of the favorites.
Yeah.
Just slipped there.
I think so much for that challenge. Thank you, folks. It's really wonderful to get to know you as people, as human beings, not just residents of the C-suite. Thank you very much for sharing these with us. Okay, let's get down to the hard work now. Next question. What has been the toughest part of your job during this downturn? All right, let's change the order this
I'll
time.
take that
Larry,
one
you want to
first.
go first? Okay.
Yeah, I think the toughest part for me has been understanding as this thing unfolded that some loyal, hardworking, dedicated coworkers of ours were going to lose their job through no fault of their own. And there was really nothing that could be done about it. And make no mistake, as hard as it is to let people go, that's a lot easier than being the person that's let go and loses their job or their career. But knowing that there was going to be people who had dedicated themselves to the company and had done nothing wrong and had done a lot of things right, that we were going to have to reduce our staff to align it with the client activity levels that we were going to be experiencing. And so I maybe did something that's not too common in the C-suite, but the people that we let go that I had spent a lot of time working with, I reached out to a lot of them either face-to-face or phone calls or emails afterwards, and tried to make some contact with them and tell them that I appreciated what they had done, and I hope things turned around and that we can get them back soon.
That's wonderful. It says a lot about you, Larry. Who's next? Vicki.
I'll go next. I agree with Larry that the impact on personnel is really, really difficult during times like this. And I think that it goes not only beyond the impact on people. And what we tried to do is not lay off. We tried to go through a process where we had voluntary separation packages, and with the bulk, and this was mainly because of the acquisition, we did reduce staff significantly, but voluntarily mostly. We did have some layoffs, and those layoffs were difficult to do. The other thing that's been difficult about this whole process is figuring out how to communicate, how to stay connected with the employees. And for me, I used to like to walk around some and go visit people, but during this time, it's been harder to do that. And in trying to figure out what kind of communication, how often, and about what has been the challenge. And so through town halls and through emails, I've started to just open myself up a bit more than I had previously, and to what I'm thinking about things. And I think that because of all the things happening in society, it's been really rough on our people. And I've tried to communicate with those that I know don't have family here in the States and don't have that support system that they can rely on. But it's been dealing with the impact on the employees, just as Larry had said.
Yeah, I'll And look, one thing nice I would say, buddy, about being on this panel is I'm learning from the panelists as we go, which I appreciate. But they're both, you know, to bridge both those, obviously the personnel side. I mean, you feel like when you do what we do, and no one's going to feel sorry for us, and we never expected, but you feel like you've got this covenant, you know, between you and the folks you brought in, and you know, and you don't want to breach that. And so when you have to make those tough decisions, they stay with you. And look, we shouldn't sleep well, and it should be painful because we know it is on the other side. And you know, the biggest challenge is leading, and it's just bridging that communication discussion into leadership. And, you know, really good stuff about Bear Bryant and the idea of belief. I mean, one thing we have to do beyond making decisions about capital allocation and how we think about the balance sheet and how we communicate with capital markets, we've got to get our folks to believe, and to believe in us, and to believe in the mission. And boy, what a tough year to think about what you believe in, you know, and this isn't a great way for us to lead, and we do the best we can. There's just rhetoric everywhere about, you know, and maybe there's a question later on it around the election and our industry and the state of our industry and how it's valued, you know. And so there's just so much that I think needs good leadership. And I bet I can speak for the other CEOs. I struggle looking internally and saying, am I doing a good enough job in that when it's needed the most and I'm on Zoom, you know, and that weighs on you in this job that, you know, did I do enough today to lead these people in a time of uncertainty? And you just hope you can. If you didn't have this, right? If you just had the commodity crisis, you figure you could develop a leadership plan around that. But when you're managing through this, you're quarterbacking, right? Now you're running it from the seat of your pants and hoping you're making the right calls. And so, you know, it's just this year's brought that extra layer of challenge, and we just have to accept it and do the very best we can.
Yeah.
Thank you, folks. Okay, next question. This is something that I struggle with constantly. Maybe you do too. How do you keep from sacrificing the important for the urgent? How do you go about doing that? Or maybe you don't have that problem.
I think Vicki's first. We're going to go through rotating, or I'm happy to tackle it.
All right, Vicki.
Okay. Well, I think it's time management has been the most difficult thing through this. But the only positive thing that's come out of this whole thing is that it's made all of us really reflect on what we do every day and what really is important, and making sure that you do the important things. But what I've tried to do now is, because I'm so focused on the day-to-day, I've set aside time for strategic thinking, and I've set aside time to just deal with what does the future look like, because there's so much uncertainty in the future. I think that's one of the most crucial things we've got to do. We've got to figure out what is the long-term impact of this, and without giving yourself think time and giving yourself time to think about the longer-term strategy, I think that things could be missed in this crisis and around what we need to do to go forward. So to me, I've just blocked off time, and I've gotten better disciplined around how to use that time.
Yeah, I think similar. You know, I try to always know what our goals are for the year, and then what our goals are for the quarter, because it's just the world we live in. And then, you know, look, on Sunday night, Sunday night, unfortunately for me, is considered a work night, because I've got to set up the week. I can't do that on Monday. And so what are the goals for the week? What are the goals for the quarter? What are the goals for the year? And then are you doing something every day on all three of those buckets? And so, you know, you do your best you can, but to something we talked about earlier, we're doing it in a world where, and I'm going to guess this is the case for all of us, do we have 3 times the amount of emails we used to have? I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And so that's the extra awesome COVID challenge, is in the middle of trying to figure out on a normal scale, hey, how do I think my longer term, my strategic versus my tactical, and how do I dedicate my time? Hey, here's your, oh, did you just wake up? And heavens for Vicki, and, you know, having operations all over the world. I don't even know what she wakes up to, but you know, here's your first 60 emails right out of the box, and you just made a cup of coffee, and some of those you have to respond to, maybe some of those not. So I think the challenge of, you know, communication digitally and emails while you're trying to dedicate those times That's something that we have to all deal with. But separating things into prioritized buckets, what's your biggest hierarchy of need in each of those buckets? I mean, we as executives, we have to learn how to do that. And we have to keep our eyes on all those balls, or one slips and you're explaining it later.
Okay, Larry, how do you do it?
Yeah, so I think I think it's important for everybody to understand there was no blueprint for what we're going through right now. There was no playbook. There was no practice squad that could have been set up to deal with the challenges. And so I think early on, and still today, it's being adaptable and agile in your thinking. New information's coming in every day. Perspective change. Are we starting to see? I have my own sort of touchstones here. A little more traffic on the way into work in the morning. I think that's a good thing. I never thought I'd say that in Houston, but starting to see things like that. And then you hear that all of a sudden Europe's going through a bit of a resurgence in virus cases and what's that's going to mean for demand. And so I think being adaptable and agile and sort of staying in touch with the sort of the near-term challenges while not taking your eye off the long-term ball. And I think what's important in terms of the long-term is remembering this is a business that inherently requires toughness and optimism. Whether you're on the exploration, production, or service side of the business, you're all going to be impacted, or we're all going to be impacted by sort of waves and things that are out of our control at times. And it's managing those events and opportunities every day while still keeping sort of a strategic vision on where you want to take the company.
Fantastic advice, definitely. Okay, let's get down to the hard stuff now. What is your industry outlook for 2021-22 in a nutshell?
Do we do an election call on this? Look, I think, I think one question that we got an email from the group on, hey, if you were to ask the audience anything, what would you ask? I'm like, hey, do people think which one will happen faster, peak supply or peak demand? But, I still believe that, demand will be there. I mean, I think, when we do loosen up the economy, we can see that pent up demand. Sometimes it's too pent up and we see a resurgence. So, but it's because that demand's there. I think this idea that we don't want to mobilize and we want to restrict our movements and, we don't want to get on airplanes, that what we're doing today is actually a better alternative to being face to face. I think it's a little bit silly. So, the question is, how does demand come back and when does demand come back and what's that mean to commodity prices? But I think, I think the biggest driver for us is, I think one thing we've learned this year, one thing we've learned in the last 12 months, 18 months on the politics is we're at an interesting crossroads in an industry where we've got to communicate our worth, and we've got to really try to make, those on the other side of our products understand why they're important and why we're good corporate citizens, and, the discussions around emissions that we can talk about on this panel and why it's important. And I think we probably have to do a better job communicating on why what we do is essential and that it can provide value and provide shareholder returns. We have a bigger challenge of doing that now than probably any point of most of our careers, and we have to accept and master that task. And so, I think I'm optimistic that we will have a rebound. I believe that as per capita GDP grows, demand grows. So I believe in those fundamentals. I'm concerned that we're losing the conversation, and we've got to all be involved in that. And look, there's more people involved in it as well externally, but it's, that's something we have to just take a little more personally, I think.
Okay, before we go to the next panelist, Derek, you want to pull up our poll question? Here's our poll question.
Hey, look, you made it a poll question.
There you go. In your honor, Tim. Which do you think will happen sooner, peak supply or peak peel demand? Peak demand.
Yeah.
So it's going to be peak supply or is it going to peak demand?
I think that's just on, just whole. And I can give my thoughts later as well. But
wait a minute, you're biasing the audience here.
Yeah, I'm not going to give any. I want people.
All right, let the audience vote, and then we'll report the results, and then you can comment.
Yeah,
I'm going to give them about 30 seconds to vote here, and you three can go ahead and vote too. So check the box, check the circle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll do that.
And then we'll see what the results are. Now, how can you beat a webinar like this? It's giving you forward-thinking
It's
guidance.
real-time stuff.
Yeah. Why don't you say when, Derek, when you think that that's enough time? Speaking of, shout out to Derek Key, who is our Zoom sommelier today. He's keeping things running smoothly.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.
Okay, there you go. Well, kind of riding the fence here. But looks like Peak Supply has a little bit of an edge. So what do you think?
I'm curious to know the panelists' thoughts, but that would be my vote.
All right, how about
Yeah, I do
the
think-
other
I
two?
think
How
there's
did you two vote?
Yep, go ahead.
I voted Peak Supply.
Yeah.
Comes first.
Larry?
Supply.
Okay, there you go. Carry on, Dim. Now that you know the answer to your question. All right, how about the rest of you? What's your outlook for the industry, Vicki, in 2021, 22?
I think from the standpoint of what the market's going to be, I think that it's going to take probably the bulk of next year to help us get to a closer point where supply and demand are in balance. But I think that because of the lack of investment and many people underestimating the decline in production in the U.S., I think the U.S. is going to have a hard time recovering and may never recover back to the 13 million. And I do believe demand will continue to grow after the pandemic. And when somebody told me yesterday, if you want to look at what could the economy be for the world after the pandemic, you look to China and they are recovering very quickly. And the U.S. economy seemed to do better initially. There's some concerns, but I think all the uncertainty now is around the election. So I do believe that by 2022, we're going to be in a healthier oil price environment and more balanced. I don't know what the price will be. I don't think we'll see, $90 or $100 again, but I think it's going to be in a scenario where because peak supply has come, I think, or will in the next few years, and then demand will continue to grow. I think we're going to have a healthy industry. We just have to make it through next year. And I think if we can make it through next year, and I think we will, the industry always has, we can do amazing things. And it'll drive technologies and innovation in areas that we haven't seen yet. So I'm optimistic about the future and about 2022 especially.
Okay, Larry?
Yeah, some great points by Tim and Vicki there. I think maybe to grab onto one of the points that Tim made first was that, as a recovering New Yorker, I remember not long after 9/11, people talking about New York's over, no one's ever going in a tall building again. Well, it was less than 2 years later, New York is back to normal. We don't do the things we do because we feel like it. We do the things we do because it makes sense at the end of the day. Those things get distilled down and businesses make sense. So I think the economy will come back, and it'll come back quicker than most people think. In terms of our industry, I think 2021 is probably going to be a gradual improvement over time. I think the back half of the year will be better than the front half of the year in 2021. And then I think it picks up steam into 2022.
All right. Sounds like good news for the most part. Okay, we touched on this a little bit, but let's dig a little deeper into this. What do you expect to be the drivers that will have the greatest impact on our industry going forward? And that can be technical, it can be political, it can be whatever. What are going to be the key drivers going forward?
I'll take that first.
Go ahead, Vicki.
I think to build on what Tim just said, I think part of it's going to be our industry needs investment. And, we used to be, the energy industry used to be 15% of the S&P. Now we're 3% of the S&P. We've lost investors, and we've lost investors for mostly because of what they perceive to be the lack of profitability in the oil and gas industry. And looking at our industry versus other industries, we certainly have way underperformed other industries. It doesn't matter whether oil prices are 90 or 100 or oil prices are 40, we've delivered about the same results. And so what we've got to do is we've got to figure out as an industry how to do better in high price environments to ensure we maintain the discipline and focus on returns, and also how to lower our cost structure and do the same thing at $40. And I think $40 over time is really the base now of our industry, because the first time that WTI averaged $40 over a week was in July of 2004. Since that week that WTI averaged $40, 95% of the time, WTI has been $40 or above. And so I think that if we can anchor on $40 and make sure that in that area that we're profitable, I think that will help investors to start getting some more confidence in our industry that we will be profitable through the cycles. I think that's one thing. The second thing is climate change. We as an industry must just go ahead and admit that climate change is happening. We don't know how much is driven by man-made things and what industry is doing, but the climate is changing. Part of it's natural, but part of it's induced by what we're doing, is my belief. And so we've got to every company really needs a climate change strategy. And the third thing is, I never thought I'd say this before because it wasn't top of mind for me until recently. And I think that corporations must take a stand around the societal issues. And that's with the diversity in our, not just diversity and inclusion in our companies, but standing up for diversity and inclusion and the rights of all people in society. And recent events in the U.S. have been shocking and disappointing. And it's a shame that we have to admit that racism exists in the United States and in a much bigger way than I even realized. Some of our employees, it hurts me to say this, but some of our employees have experienced racism, and it makes me mad. And so we as a corporation have an obligation to do something about it because we have the wherewithal to do it. And I think those three things, if we can do those three things in a bigger way, our industry is going to get more respect, and I believe we'll start to gain investment back to, or get investors back to our industry.
Well, speaking of, Vicki, I noticed in your bio that you're a member of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. So it's obvious that you've taken some action in that area to try to exert some influence. So we applaud you there. Okay, Larry, what do you say?
Well, some great points by Vicki there. I think the I think the drivers for the industry are the foundation of it is going to be that there are now about 4 billion people that are just entering a phase of growth in energy demand. There's some nice work that's been done that uses South Korea as an example and what that country looked like in the 70s, and when they reached a certain level of economic development, the demand for energy usage exploded, and there really is no option other than hydrocarbons to meet that growing energy demand, and that's going to take us through I think the next couple of decades with ups and downs along the way of meeting that energy demands that it's going to come out of these 4 billion people. And the lack of investment, to tie in with what Vicki said, if you've been through, like many of us have, you've been through 4 or 5 cycles in the industry, you see this same pattern play out again. There's a sense that, oh, doesn't have value. I'm not going to invest in it. I can't get a return there. I'm gonna go invest in something else. And then when people sort of least expect it, the demand very quickly catches up with the supply, and opportunities come back to make profitability, profitable business viable in the industry, and get a return for shareholders. So I think those two things, I'd say the underlying demand that's about to explode in the world as people move into what we would consider sort of first world expectations for availability and reliability of energy, home appliances, things like that, expands throughout the world. And that there'll be a cycle where, and it often catches the industry off guard, or catches the investment industry off guard when, oh gosh, we're missing the turn here on investing in energy. And then it gets sort of a frenzy of to try to claw back into it. I think that's going to be the drivers that we're going to have to deal with over the next couple of years or so.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, look, I'll add to all that, and Vicki's comments are right on point, and Larry brought up some good points as well. I think, furthering to some of Vicki's comments, one of the biggest things we have to do as an industry is not only acknowledge the points Vicki raised with respect to climate, with respect to social justice, but make sure people understand we're not on the, our industry and our companies are not on the wrong side of those issues, or some presumption that, again, you get the climate, because we're oil and gas companies, we must be on the wrong side of those issues. I mean, we've just got to do a better job of making folks understand that we're on the right side of these issues. And if we have to, again, to Vicki's point, if we have to speak out a little more about that, we need to look on the topic of social justice. Vicki and I are both, products of the South, and so we know what privilege looks like, and we know how many good people there are in our hometowns and the places we live, but then what those challenges look like. And so, boy, it's a topic that we can dive into for a long time, but we got to make sure we communicate it the right way and we protect the right folks. On climate, it's interesting. Somehow we have to convince ourselves that that producing oil in the U.S. and the way and the standards we do it, and it's such an important product, and so many people need to be lifted out of their circumstance. And there's so much food insecurity. When you have food insecurity, you probably have energy insecurity. Somebody's probably having to make a tough decision about heating their house, or can they afford an air conditioner and afford the grocery bill for the week. And our goal and our ability to deliver natural gas or oil to transport a car is so that it can last a little longer. They can drive 20 extra miles to a job that pays a little more. And we just have to keep sharing those stories. And, a default position that because we're in the oil and gas business, that we're not part of the solution, we can't allow ourselves to get into that default position, or we'll just be in that default position. And so I just think, that you can't put your head in the sand on the big topics that Vicki raised. If we do that, then you're giving your proxy to everybody else on the planet. And it may not turn out real well for you. So you've just got to be involved.
Fantastic. Speaking of, what technologies do you believe will be critical to the industry's recovery? What technologies impress you, or you see the greatest need for to help us get through the downturn?
So I'll start there. So a couple things that, again, we're offshore guys, and that's just what we do. And obviously we do it in the Gulf, and we're doing it in offshore Mexico. And hopefully as we build this company, and to Vicki's earlier point, when you're 3%, when energy is 3% of the S&P, building a charming little small cap is not what it was 10, 15 years ago. So we have to make our company bigger, and we hope and aspire to be, a bigger company 3 years from now, 4 years from now. So we have to look at other places in the world and other technologies. On the drilling side, anything that allows us to be more efficient in finding and developing reserves, and that can come from a lot of different places, and the geophysics and the reservoir evaluation, downhole tools, anything that lets us make better decisions faster before we spend that next $10 million, $15 million on a project. It helps us control capital, not drill a dry hole. It's just going to benefit all of us, because to Vicki's point, we've got a lifting cost structure we're trying to get down in a $40 to $45 environment. Somewhere on top of that, we got to allocate capital. So what makes that capital more efficient? And the second one, going back to emissions, we've got to find technologies that help us control our emissions. We have a lot of top sides. There's some methane venting. We've got to do a better job of offshore. Now we're lucky on our subsea world. There really aren't very many emissions, and that's a really, really good carbon intensity story. But look, we're going to be measured by that. We're putting out ESG reports. I suspect in some jurisdictions, your cost of capital goes down as your intensity goes down. I actually think that's an appropriate reward system. So anything that can help us with carbon capture and emissions, it is a permanent part of our lives. It should be, and we've got to, we got to find those technologies.
Next up.
So Larry, you want to go, or I'll just go next? Hi, but I have to give a plug to you guys, because to Core Lab, because when Kent Newsham, who's our chief petrophysicist, found out I was going to do this panel, he did send me a list of the things that Core Lab is helping with and has done for us, and so I appreciate all the work with you. What's happened in our industry is I really feel very proud of the fact that our industry has done some amazing things from the drilling side and subsurface completions. And I think some people don't realize the advanced technology that we use. I did hear one person say one time, who does appreciate it, that the oil and gas industry's technology is more sophisticated than NASA. I'm not sure I agree with that, but certainly people recognize at least that it's on the same scale. I feel like that for us, that now in this environment, it's not just drilling and completion technology, subsurface technology is even more important now because we are running out of new reservoirs. Exploration in the around the world has dropped dramatically in terms of the recoveries and new reservoirs that we're finding. So we need to figure out how to get more out of the reservoirs that we have, not just from a completion standpoint, how do we do that, but how do we also lift it? How do we get and process it through enhanced oil recovery? And that's what we're focusing a lot on, is CO2 enhanced oil recovery. But even something like beam pumps, you know, how long have beam pumps been around? Can we not use or develop some sort of artificial lift that doesn't use all of that steel? So I think that as great as the drilling and completion technologies are, we've got to focus a bit more now on continuing the great subsurface work, but applying it to the existing wells that we have today. And that's one way that we can lower our cost structure, by taking advantage of getting more out of the ground where we have the infrastructure already in place.
Larry, just 1 minute.
Yeah.
I would add to that, Vicki, you commented about how the oil industry technologies are every bit as sophisticated as NASA. I think we need to change that expression that we often use, and that is, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. I think we have to change that to, you don't have to be a petroleum engineer to figure this out. Anyway, go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I think
I like it.
sort of at a high level, some of the points that Tim and Vicki made, speed is going to be critical. Things that allow folks to get to decision point faster, more efficiently, that's going to be critical. And another sort of high level, sort of philosophical one is data acquisition and organization. I think that's going to be critical too. I think that feeds into getting to decision making very quickly. At a more granular level, something that Vicki mentioned, and it's public information, so it's not sharing anything secretly. Oxy and Core Lab published, I think, one of the trigger point publications for what could be accomplished with EOR and unconventional reservoirs. I think looking for ways to get that incremental barrel of oil out of the ground is exactly what Vicki was talking about. That's going to be critical going forward. I think on a larger scale, or in addition to that, making the most out of sort of unconventional reservoirs that the U.S. and North America is blessed with. I think there's going to be a cycle that comes through of investment in conventional reservoirs. A lot of that's going to be offshore. That's where the needle movers are for a lot of companies going forward. We see that playing out in the Gulf of Mexico, like with Talos, and along the South Atlantic margin. I think you see some big opportunities there. I think that might be the next big cycle of investment that we see that hasn't been fully appreciated yet. That's going to take place over the next 5 to 10 years.
All right, good point. You've already partially addressed the next question. Let's move on. And Larry, you're welcome to add to that comment if you like. But what geographic basins do you expect to be the next Guyana?
Well, I think the Guyana one is mostly a comment related to Core Lab. It's been a great project to have going on particularly during a difficult time, and it's extended beyond Guyana into Suriname for us now. We've already talked about that we're opening offices in Brazil to deal with what we see as a nice wave of exploration coming there. I don't think we should ever forget, though, that there's this incredible resource onshore U.S., the unconventionals, and with some of the work that we've done in the laboratory, where we've shown we can get the recovery rates up from call it mid to high single digits into the call it mid-teens maybe. If what we've established can work in the lab, can work in the subsurface, where it's a lot more complicated. You've got containment issues with gas injection that have to be addressed, and some big technological challenges to be done. But I think there's a incredible resource that North America is blessed with, and with the right climate for investment there, and capital in the hands of people who use it effectively. I think there's great opportunity there. And then I think beyond that, I think the South Atlantic margin, sort of near term, is where I'd say big opportunities for the industry and for Core Lab.
Okay.
Should I take it? So, look, a couple areas that, first of all, what's happening in Guyana is unbelievable. I mean, you just read again and again and again. And, again, one thing about our industry, that's an opportunity now to change so many lives in that part of the world. If you look at just another area, that we've looked at before, and just as fascinating, we're not in it, is the amount of gas in the Eastern Med and what that's going to do for that area. That's an area that probably generated electricity solely on coal 15 years ago, and now all that's being swapped out with natural gas. It's bringing countries together in the area. I mean, what a wonderful impact something like that happens. We're pretty optimistic, and you guys know this at Core Labs, on the amount of the hydrocarbon availability in the lower Pliocene to the middle Miocene section in offshore Mexico. I mean, for folks who follow this, look, offshore Mexico produced 25 billion barrels faster than we did in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico with one operator, and we did that with hundreds of operators. And so Pemex had a long history of technical success, in part because they had these really big discoveries in an older, more fractured environment. And so now we have the section of the Gulf that's being exploited, and we have our discovery in Zama. You guys have worked on the cores. There's 1,400 feet of core. And I think we've talked about it. The rock properties in that core that you guys grabbed for us, I mean, it's mind-boggling for geologists. It's life-altering for some of those geologists who come through the lab. And now that core is in the hands of Mexican universities. But the fact that we just, quickly found a 4,000-acre three-way closure in the upper Miocene, and that there's so much of that in that province, that now that, industry players, and look, there's jurisdictional challenges, and we hope that they really embrace what the impact can have for the country if Pemex does the very best they can do, and then all of these industry partners do the very best they can do for that kind of hydrocarbon province that's been untapped because it's only had one operator for the last 80 years. Boy, oh boy, there's an opportunity there. I hope it sees its potential, because it has it.
And I'd add to that, in addition to that, I mentioned we're open office in Brazil. We made a big investment into an office in Mexico, just to be able to look at seeing the same opportunities that Tim just described there. There's huge hydrocarbon opportunity right there, and close to a market that needs you on.
About it, Vicki.
So Larry, I'd say don't forget about the extension of Guyana going north, and that is offshore Colombia. So maybe it's not new, but it's something that hasn't been assessed yet. And this is self-serving on my part, but I'm hoping that will be the next boom.
Wasn't sure we could talk about that, Vicki.
And we're looking for partners, and appreciate your help, Larry.
Well, speaking of,
Commercial. I'm sorry.
I just did one.
well, speaking of, how can you approach some of these new basins, considering the geopolitical issues associated with those countries? How can you go in there with some assurance that they're not going to pull the carpet out from under you? How do you go about assessing those risks?
Yeah, you've got to understand, the contract structure, and you've got to understand, what are you entering into, and so we, the good news about the Mexico, lease rounds we entered into, and admittedly different administration, but you knew what the contract looked like when you went in, so you understood the efficacy of the contract, what it was going to do, how it's going to be arbitrated, what the dispute resolution looked like. I mean, you have to look, you got to know what you're walking into. As good as a hydrocarbon province can be, you have to understand how you're going to manage potential conflicts. And so, even in Mexico, there's a little rhetoric, and I get inbounds from time to time. But even the president has said, look, we understand the contracts we entered into. We understand we have to honor those agreements. Brazil has had ebbs and flow of political turmoil, but those PSCs have stood strong. So I think you've got to really understand the sanctity of that contract. But before you walk into the jurisdiction, would just be an initial thought.
I think that's a great answer. I can't really add to that. I think Tim's absolutely right.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there is that I think a lot of people have come to the realization that it's a little less risky doing business in West Texas than in West Africa. So I think there's a place for both, but a political landscape is always going to be a challenge that has to be dealt with in the fire industry. It's nothing new.
Well, look, I get questions all the time, and investors, hey, are you worried about the government? And my response is always, which one?
Yeah. Very fair.
For the next month, it might be our government, huh?
Never know.
Okay, next question. If you could personally help solve one industry problem before you step down, and it could be technology, it could be socioeconomic, what would that one industry problem be that you would really like to have an impact on?
I'll take a shot at that, buddy. I think it's something that Tim and Vicki already touched on here. I think the PR industry, the PR problem that the industry faces is one that I just by my approach, I kind of deal with on a person-to-person basis. I wish people could understand the freedom, how their life is so impacted by the availability of inexpensive energy. Tim, you gave a great example there, the ability to say, hey, I've got a better job opportunity, and because I can afford an extra gallon of gas a day to go drive a little further, that's a great example there of freedom that comes from low-cost energy. We've still got too many people on the planet burning dung and wood and coal, and the idea that hydrocarbons or that oil and gas are somehow the enemy of the people, when in fact it is the liberator of people. That free energy or that low-cost energy that's out there impacts everything in people's lives, and I try to convey that to folks I know that are outside the industry. And get them to think about, hey, I can jump in my car and I can drive from Houston to Amarillo on a whim to go visit a family member without ever thinking about it, because I know there's this available low-cost energy that's there. I just count on it. They take it for granted too much.
I'd agree with Larry, and to add to that, it's perception, and Larry's absolutely right. We've got to, and I think part of the way we do that is we try to help people understand we do care about the climate, we do care about people, and we're doing our best to ensure that we get our product to the right places. And people have to understand that their iPhones and everything that they like, their televisions, all of that, without oil production, it wouldn't exist. So I think it's perception. But I personally, I'd want everyone to, the thing I'd like to leave and that I'd like to help the industry with is the climate change part of it. Because I think that we do have a good story to tell. We've reduced emissions significantly in the U.S. All companies have been involved in doing it. It's not one or two. It's not the big guys only. It's every company is working hard to do it, and we've accomplished a lot in the U.S.
Yeah, look, it's all the same answer. I mean, we were talking about books earlier. I refuse to not be in these changing views of capitalism, a Milton Friedman fan. I think, people will drive technology because profits are forcing them to drive being more efficient. So I don't worry about that. I think we're inherently going to do that. So then it takes you back to this biggest threat that I think is our industry, and trying to understand the conversation around climate and the conversation around the good things we do can be connected. We don't have to be presumed to be the enemy. And so we just have to just pound that point on the benefits of producing natural gas. I mean, we produce oil offshore. It goes right into our pipelines. I mean, I think in our last 25 million barrels of operated production, half a barrel have gotten outside our control. I mean, the things we do in this industry from an HSE perspective and an environmental stewardship perspective, we should be proud of, and it should be recognized. And if we have to do a better job of delivering those statistics, of being out front, then we just have to do a better job of that, because we know what we're capable of. We know what our contribution looks like, but that message isn't driving through. And whether that, and again, the same thing as Vicki was talking about earlier on investors. We know we can deliver solid returns. We know this business is one that people should invest in, but we've got to do a better job convincing folks of that. Well, the same thing goes to these other topics as well. And we just got to take that personally. If we let others do that, I mean, even as a small company, we're very involved, I think, in governmental affairs and outward facing things, because you hand your proxy to others. I'm happy to hand it to Vicki, by the way. She does a fantastic job, but you don't know what everyone's going to say. So you have, as a CEO, you have to make this decision. I have to be involved in these topics. You just have to be.
Fantastic. Well, you mentioned an author, Tim, that you're familiar with. So let me ask this question. What news source or podcast or authors or other resource do you depend on most for your information? Where do you really go for the truth?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. A couple things. I'm a CNBC junkie. I mean, like it's on my radio, it's on the TV in the office. I mean, it's somewhat sad. You know, and so I think two people would make me turn my head if they walked down the street. Some pro golfer, because I can't hit a golf ball good enough and I don't know how they do it, or somebody from CNBC. But so I like their effort. I like I read the Wall Street Journal quite a bit. You know, I do my best to try to keep, I think it's as balanced as we can try to get. And, you know, I do think, you know, and we've all kind of talked about social dilemma, and we're learning about the challenges of trying to maintain independence and trying not to allow yourself to be, you know, sucked into bad information and forcing yourself to do your own research. So I you know, I do like those. I've got a lot of podcasts. I just don't listen. I like Malcolm Gladwell. I've got all these different podcasts, and I just don't find time to listen to them all. And maybe you guys do. It's good stuff. They keep downloading, but I don't listen to them. I got to tell you, sometimes when things get stressed beyond all the news, and I've got about a 45-minute commute home, you'll find me just turning on some music and checking out, you know. So we don't have a lot of time to digest the news. I've given you some of the sources I like. I've got podcasts that I'm 80 episodes behind on, because sometimes I might just be playing music from somewhere in the early 90s on the way home, because I just, you know, got off some one-on-one calls or some other news story, and I just need to check out for 45 minutes. But those are a couple of the ones I lean on.
All right.
I'd say I lean on Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg. And I will say, before I got this role, it was only sports talk.
There's no doubt. I may be doing a little bit of that still.
Honesty lives.
Yeah.
But since 2016, it's been Bloomberg. And I got to challenge you on something, Tim. I absolutely never, ever listened to CNBC.
Really?
Never.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, we'll talk offline about that.
Yeah, well, look, maybe if I go through one interview, I'll stop.
All right.
Both kind of similar here. Wall Street Journal every day, Financial Times fairly routinely. You know, those are, we've got those around us every day. I've got Bloomberg screens in my office. I'm on those regularly. It's pretty addictive. It's kind of an endless, bottomless pit. You can keep digging and digging and digging and digging into that. At some point, you lose sight of the sun. So that's something you have to do. And Tim, for me, it's XM74 Bluesville on the way home.
Yeah. I might be a lithium guy on some of that. And by the way, Vicki, I'm going to guess it's Kramer, and I've given up on Kramer.
Okay.
Yeah, I've Kramer.
It is Kramer.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I've given up on that. I think Joe Squawk in the morning.
There's probably more. There's more to it than you know. So I'll tell you offline.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned you're kind of a 90s music guy, Tim. What about the other two? What's your favorite music genre?
I'm a blues guy.
I listen to the Blend on Sirius.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm a blues guy. It took me a while to figure out what I like, but I remember as a kid watching B.B. King on. I was probably 12 or 13. B.B. King was on the Johnny Carson show, and it just kind of opened my eyes to the nonsense I was listening to on AM radio in New York, and said, "Hey, that stuff's pretty good." And I've been attracted to it the rest of my life.
So I'm going to give you guys something. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to guess Vicki has. but if you haven't, it was a YouTube documentary, and I'm sure you can find it somewhere, but it's called Muscle Shoals. And so
Yeah.
Muscle Shoals, small town in Alabama. And I'm telling you, it's a small town. I mean, look, it's not 5,000 people, but it's not 50, right? So it's about 20,000. I can tell you where the best place to eat fried chicken is in Muscle Shoals. It's on the north side of the river. There's, Florence is on the south side. And it has these 2 studios that are not bigger than 30 by 30. I mean, you just have to see them to understand. You got to be kidding me. And every great artist in the 60s and early 70s ran through Muscle Shoals, Alabama. And that's why it's in the song. And, well, from Rolling Stones to Aretha Franklin, they all ran through Muscle Shoals. And so go see that documentary. It will shock you that little town in Alabama produced that kind of music.
All right, I heard a lot of mention of blues. My question to you is, but have you been on Beale Street in Memphis?
Yeah. Yeah.
You have?
Come on, buddy.
All right.
Of course.
All right, just checking.
Of course.
Okay, next question. How do you ensure effective communication and collaboration between disciplines within your organization? I mean, you all have multiple disciplines, that you are involved with. How do you ensure effective communication and collaboration between those disciplines?
So one thing, look, that's a challenge, and I'm actually interested to hear Vicki's insights on this. And we started a company 8 years ago. There's 4 of us, and we have 500 employees now, right? So that's and we're going to grow, and we hope to grow. Obviously, there's downturns, and this year is not a hiring year, but we hope to get back to that. So as we build out this organization, how do we not lose what we had in the intimacy of that communication and the collaboration? And so one thing we're trying to do is I'm trying to make sure my executive team is talking to each other. So, I have lunches with every member of my executive team on a rotation, and I'm asking them to have lunches on rotations as well. Because if the executive teams are talking to each other, if the heads of drilling is talking with the heads of production or geology, exploration is talking to land, if you see that relationship at the executive level, you're going to see that collaboration, I hope, at the teams level. And so, it's just one way to try to do that. And then I think it does start at the top, where we want to make sure it's understood that that's the culture we want to have. And if we don't have it, then let's figure out how to get there. But it's a culture that we just have to have. And if you set that expectation and you immerse yourself in that, which again, challenge of COVID and the immersion part, then it generally plays itself through.
I would say that's been since the day I started work. That's been a challenge, and I don't think we've perfected it at all. But we've tried to structure our workflow processes so that it requires and facilitates that communication. And we have the internal Yammer system where people can talk from and chat together in the various chat groups, and we've noticed that helps, because people now in Oman can chat with people in the Permian, and they do it more freely than they used to. It's different than email. It's just easier to get on and do. And so that seems to be working well to encourage that communication. And then where we can, we've encouraged, before the pandemic, encouraged a lot of networking and try to make that happen. But it's a challenge, and I wouldn't say that we've solved it in Oxy, but I give a lot of credit to our employees, because where I have failed, they have stepped up and filled the gap, and they're trying to make it happen, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you got to live it, and I know both Vicki and Tim do. You've got to be accessible. You have to demonstrate that openness and approachability to the staff, and so I know I do that whenever I can. I hit every major region on the planet at least once a year, this year being the exception. I make sure I've been available. Buddy, you've been the maestro for the town hall meetings with ProTechnics. I think it was a little bit of a sort of a generational turnover at Core Lab. We've probably done more corporate communication in the last 6 months than we did in the last 10 years. And it's just sort of a change in approachability and accessibility. And I think if the leaders are out in front doing that, it promotes it through the organization.
Well said, all.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to ask you an off-the-grid question here that maybe you weren't prepared for, but I think since we've got a lot of individual attendees, we have over 180 individual attendees. and a fair number of them are from service companies, and both from service companies and operators. How would you, or how can the two sectors better collaborate? We're talking about how our internal disciplines can better collaborate. How can the operators and the service providers better collaborate to everyone's mutual benefit? What would you suggest in the area of collaboration?
I can take a shot at that. I mean, we got two exceptional examples sharing the screen today with us. We've been involved in technology development with Oxy on a number of fronts, and we also had a great collaboration for the Mexican government that we did with Tim's organization to help promote what Tim's company was doing and how we were helping them do. I think it starts with my perspective is it starts with the operators looking at service companies as partners, and as rather than as filling a rate sheet on a bid and just the relationship is built around a procurement exercise. The best relationship that I've had over decades, whether it's been with key contacts at Aramco or with Oxy or Talos or with other companies that we've had this relationship with, it's when I start to feel, I know I'll personalize this, when I start to feel an obligation not to let that person down, the client down at a personal level. That's when I'm walking around the lab 5 years ago saying, hey, this thing goes to the front of the line because this has to get done today, or we're working overtime to get this done because it has to get done to meet their time frame. That's when the benefit really starts to grow.
I think for us, it's been more around trying to ensure that we're not beating up the service providers because of unit cost, and that we try to figure out between them and us what are the minimum things that we have to do to get through this environment and to survive in this kind of environment. And we always try to maintain good relationships with our service providers in good times, because it's important during times like this that you have a relationship, that you have the respect and the trust. And so going through this pandemic, what we're doing now, more now than we did as we were going into this, is getting them together with us to ask, what is, from your viewpoint, what should we be doing that could help you make it through? And can we figure out together what are your needs versus ours? And those service providers that perhaps have all of their equipment paid for and it's just maintaining the people that's important, then how do we structure a system around addressing your needs while helping us to continue activity levels? And one of the ways to do that is that for most service providers, it's just having some cash flow coming in is what they need. And for us, we need activity levels. So we're looking at some various ways to address both of those needs, because we need the service providers to stay healthy. If they don't make it through this, it's not a good structure for us going forward.
Yeah, no, I think all that's not a lot new. I think it's about, trying to sit down with your key service providers and talk about what your goals are earlier in the process, and as opposed to say, hey, I just need this tool at this time, make it up this way. I think we got to bring folks in earlier and say, hey, here's what we're trying to accomplish on this project, which, by the way, might be 4 months from now. And so let's all just try to plan on, again, what's the right technology, what's the right pricing, what's the right payment, how do we do this? Because we really want to achieve these goals. We want you to be a part of it. So, right. I think we just got to break it away from procurement and beating up on pricing, and really just talk about, here's our goals. Here's what we have to achieve this year. It's a difficult year, and we got to achieve these 4 or 5 things. What can you do to help us achieve that? And how can you have a role in that? And then I think you get a better collaboration. And so we're trying to push on our operations teams to engage earlier in the process. I tell you again, we hate to keep complaining about Zooms and COVIDs, but that's been a challenge in on some of the supply chain and the delivery of that communication, you know, in an environment where you can't get together face to face. But look, we'll get through all that. But I think planning earlier, communication earlier, sharing real goals. I mean, it's not like this is material, non-public information if I'm going to try to go drill a well. So let's get in there and collaborate sooner on what we're trying to accomplish this year and see if that leads to creativity and you know, the product, services, or pricing, or all the above.
And try to be flexible. Gotta be-
Yeah, we both have to be, right?
Great advice. All right, one last question here. If you were asked to offer one nugget of wisdom for young industry professionals, what would it be? One nugget of wisdom they can take with them.
Yeah, you know, look, I would say at every point in your career, particularly in the first 5 years, you have an opportunity to exceed expectations. You have to first know what those expectations are and then figure out how to exceed them. And that's going to take, and so I'll couple that under the same umbrella of that piece of advice. And you have to understand what sacrifice you're willing to make to exceed that expectation. And if you're not willing to make that sacrifice, you probably aren't going to exceed that expectation. And maybe that's okay. That doesn't mean you can't have a long, healthy career. But I've always told folks that, you know, again, when you're 24, there's an expectation. That bar is low. You have an opportunity to exceed it. You just have to decide to put that desire ahead of maybe other things. And when you're 35, you may not be able to exceed them. Those expectations are going to be very, very high 35 years out. So you have that opportunity, because this is about young folks, in those first 5 years to hit it out of the park. It's right there in front of you. You just have to go hit it. And it's frankly a softball, because no one's going to sit there and go, boy, I'm going to rely on that 23-year-old in this project. That's not going to happen. So you have a chance to exceed, you know, and I think looking back, I was so desperate to not fail. I came from, you know, I wasn't, both Vicki and I, we weren't from the elite, you know, if you will, petroleum schools. And I just wanted to prove myself, probably had a little chip on my shoulder. I didn't realize I was probably exceeding people's expectations at 24, 25, 26, because I was never really measuring what they were. I just threw my whole self into it. And then I found out I was putting myself on a different track. So, you know, I'm sure people love to run marathons and hit, you know, a social hour 4 or 5 times. You might have to give some of that up if you want to really exceed people's expectations. And you just have to make that decision early in your career.
And to build on what Tim said and use a different analogy, I'm not a baseball analogy person, but football, it's you have to play every down like it's the down that could win or lose the game for your team. So you got to play every down really, really hard, whether it's in practice or whether it's in the game. And like Tim said, practice is maybe in between those critical deadlines. Practice is when you're doing some routine work, and then you get on a project, and then you're really in the game. You got a project with a deadline. If you're working really, really hard every day leading up to that, and you have a discipline about you and a work ethic, then you're going to be better prepared for the times when you can really excel and really show what you can do. And I'd say above and beyond that is to be passionate about what you do, and be the kind of person that you would want to work with and that others would want to work with. And if you're that kind of person, then you're going to get the opportunities. Just be a person that contributes to the team and who's the team player. And then the last thing I'd say is that within your organization and in life, wherever it is, if you set a goal to try to make at least one person's day better every day, if every day you find one person and you try to make their day better, whether it's spending some time talking to them, even a smile sometimes, if you see somebody who seems to be struggling, that's all it takes sometimes to make somebody's day better. But if you try to make that a goal and do it every day, people are going to want to be around you. People are going to want to work with you. You're going to get attention and you're going to get the opportunities. So you couple that with passion and what Tim had said, and you're going to get chances and opportunities, and you'll do well.
Yeah, I'll start with both great points, Vicki and Tim. I'll start with a personal experience there that I think maybe some folks going through what they're going through today in the industry might appreciate. So I'm a year out of school, a small company, Reservoirs Inc. I started there. There were about 50, 60 people. Got down to about 15 or 18, and I somehow survived that early on. And I think some of the things that Tim and Vicki talked about, I guess I was bringing to the table every day. But when you start to see coworkers' cars get repossessed out of the parking lot, you start dialing into yourself, this is going to be a cyclical industry. There's going to be ups and downs in it. Don't live your life at the high point of the cycle and expect that to go on. So maybe dial it into sort of your personal approach to your family finances. But in that, I think also, and I think this is you don't want to get too overwhelmed by a recency phenomenon that can cloud your view. This can be a tough industry, but it can also be a great industry. And when the sun is shining, it's a great place to be. It's always a great place to be in terms of intellectual stimulation and economic and technical challenges. I can't think of a better industry, and I wouldn't trade it even with all the ups and downs that we go through in the industry. I wouldn't trade it for any other industry. But understand that there is a time when there are times when the sun is shining on our industry, and when that happens, it's really darn good.
All right, Larry, you said you wouldn't trade it for any other industry. Would you trade it for one season to wear the pinstripes?
You damn right. Let me think about that again. Yeah, you're damn right.
Okay, that's great. And speaking of, you know, it's no surprise to me, having gotten to meet the three of you, that all three of your organizations typically finish very high in some of the top workplaces in Houston to work. And it's no wonder with the level of leadership and the personal approach that all three of you take. It's no wonder that you are winning awards of that nature.
I appreciate that, buddy. I tell you quickly on those things, you know, and some people don't know how that works. You know, there's no campaign around that. How that works is the employees get a survey and it's anonymous and they just get to fill it out. And look, sometimes anonymous surveys aren't your best friend. And so the good part about those surveys is you get a chance to get the feedback, and maybe you're going to be on the list and maybe you're not, and you hope you are, but you got to do something with that feedback. And so, you know, I think I actually enjoy going through the process. My HR department laughs because I read they're making me a huge binder, and I read every single one of those comments, and I just try to reflect on them. And like, you know, there's some grain of salt, whatever, but then some of that stuff, you're like, boy, that's a good comment. We got to do better. And if that better gets you on a list, particularly in a commodity cycle, like Larry talked about, you know, when it's not easy, you know, like we've had downturns, then, you know, we'll take it. But it's really about trying to improve and getting the feedback, you know, from your employees.
Fantastic, folks. Well, we're coming to an end here, and it's probably pretty obvious the answers to the favorite sports teams. But in case you didn't pick up on that, Vicki's favorite sports team are the Alabama Crimson Tide, Roll Tide, and their head football coach, Mr. Saban, was the one who did the commercials with the Aflac talking duck. So that's number one. Number two, you've already figured out that Larry Bruno is a huge Yankee fan. The mystery there is he grew up in Queensboro, and you're supposed to be a Mets fan when you grew up over there. So it's sad that Larry chose to be a Yankees fan, and unfortunately he can't go back to Queens now. That's very disappointing, but that's the road he's chosen. And then Duncan, Tim, you and I probably hurt badly Sunday afternoon to see Dak Prescott.
What a great person he is. And there's not anything I like about the Cowboys, and I record every game and watch every game because I care that deeply about Dak Prescott and his walk through the NFL, and just, I hated to see it.
Yeah, in case if you didn't know, Dak Prescott was quarterback for Tim's Mississippi State Bulldogs in his college career.
Yeah.
So that was definitely hard on all of us.
Hey, buddy, can I just point out one thing?
Sure.
That is, Bear Bryant never did a commercial with a duck.
There you go.
There's no other takeaway. It's Bear Bryant never did a duck commercial.
There's a standard that he kept that did not involve ducks.
No ducks.
I get it.
I can't picture Bear Bryant doing any kind of commercial, really.
Nope.
Hats.
That's 1 minute he's not planning right there.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, folks, and very informative. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. We'll let you go a little bit early so you can get back to your 60 email that you've missed.
That's in the last hour, no doubt.
Right.
So
Thanks,
very
thanks
much.
to your team, Buddy and Larry. Thanks to you guys. Vicki, good to be with you. And thanks for those. I mean, I looked, it looks like we had a lot of viewers, so we appreciate that. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, folks.
It
Have
was
a
great to be here.
week and
Appreciate it.
keep doing the wonderful things you're doing for your people and the industry. God bless.
All right.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Vicki.
All right.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.